Okay, so we're on to kind of the next way that you can create much more complex shapes in Illustrator. And usually for me, that kind of starts with like making some basic shapes and then using the Pathfinder. So we're just going to go Window and we're going to go down to Pathfinder. And this is the Pathfinder palette. And I've got a shape here that I've already made. I just made that with the ellipse tool. And there are like four things that the Pathfinder can do, right? And so I'm just going to click on my shape and I'm going to copy Command C. I'm going to paste it in place, Command F. So there's a second one right on top of it. And then if I click Shift, I can just kind of drag the shape kind of over to the side, right? So I have these two shapes here. And I mean, I could group the shapes and they would still kind of act then as one shape, but there's kind of an easier way to make them several different types of shapes. So I'm just going to swipe over them. And my guides have been locked, so I can swipe anywhere I want without affecting the guides. So I selected both of them, and you'll notice that there's this kind of petal shape or leaf shape in the middle. And this can be like a really nice, simple shape to work on some of these transformations, right? So there's four things, right, that the Pathfinder can do. I can click on the first one, which unites both shapes. And if I click on it, you'll notice that it's just like kind of one shape now. The center has disappeared, right? It's almost like that MasterCard logo at this point. I'm just going to undo, right? That's one thing it can do. The second thing that it can do is it can minus the front shape from the bottom shape. So the circle on the right is the shape on the front because it was the last shape to be made on the page, right? So if I just click minus, you'll notice that it almost took a bite out of that shape, um, you know, by just kind of punching it through. It is a destructive way of editing because you'll notice that my second circle has disappeared. It used the second circle to punch through the first circle. So if you want to punch through the first one and still maintain the second circle, I might just copy it into copy it. So let's try this one more time. I just went undo. I'm going to click. I'm going to copy Command C. Okay. I'm going to swipe over both of them. I'm going to punch. I'm going to click one time on minus. Okay. So it kind of took a bite out of it. And then I'm going to click on Command F and it pastes the second shape down out of memory. And, maybe I am wanting to have that shape there. Maybe I'm just wanting to punch through so I can do something like that, right? So it's a way to kind of create an interesting kind of white space between the two shapes. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to undo. We're going to get back to here. So I have Command Z'd back, undo. And so now the third thing it will do is it will intersect the two shapes, right? So if I click on that, it just leaves me with this kind of cool little petal or leaf shape, which I think is kind of interesting. Um, And then the fourth thing that it will do is it will minus whatever is in the interior. And if I just kind of drag the shape off of the board, you'll kind of notice that it's punched a hole when it minus the shape, okay? So it's kind of a compound shape now in that I'm able to see through. But it really is just the two shapes and it got rid of the center shape. And then there's another thing that it can do. I'm just swiping over to selecting it thing that I think is actually pretty useful, and I use it quite a bit, is this divide, where it just basically, I'm going to click on it, so click, and it's basically giving me the three different shapes. So if I go Object, Ungroup, now I have access to all three of the shapes. It basically just divided it so I have the three shapes, and it's a pretty easy way to like kind of make um, interesting shapes. And then the other thing that I find myself using Pathfinder for a lot is, when you go object and you go down to compound and you make this compound path because you're trying to punch a hole through something. And, sometimes that doesn't really work. Okay. I'm not quite sure why. I think it has something to do with one path going clockwise and another path going counterclockwise. But say I want to punch a circular hole through this shape, and I just drew that shape. It's the shape on top, right? It's gonna punch through whatever. It's going to use the top shape to punch through or bite through. I'm just going to swipe over both objects. And then again, if I go up to minus, it's just punched through that hole. And if I kind of drag it off onto the pasteboard, you can see that indeed I can see through the shape. It has kind of created a compound path. And sometimes the only way to get shapes to actually punch through, right, is using this pathfinder. Right? I'm not quite sure why that is, right? So if I create a large shape, okay, I just created a large shape, and then I'm just going to create a series of smaller shapes. So copy, paste in place, right? Copy, paste in place, and then Command D to transform, copy, Command C, Command F, Command D, right? So I basically created 4 shapes there. I should be able to go Object, Group, so that's now one object. I should be able to hold down my Shift key, right, in order to select everything. And if I go back up to my Pathfinder and minus the top shape, which are the little shapes, right? So now you notice that it's kind of poked a hole, 4 different holes, right? So there's a way to create, a way to poke a hole through an object so I can see through it to whatever is below. And that's kind of the quick way of thinking about like complex shapes and the Pathfinder. And so now we're going to kind of go on to doing some transformations in order to create these really kind of interesting, kind of spirographic designs.